Everybody, and welcome to HackerKast. This is the YouTube webcast where we talk about all things application security, but mostly current events to help everybody keep up to speed on the things that are going on out there. I'm with Matt Johansen out of actually today you're in Santa Clara at headquarters. Right on.
Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm right next to your office.
And we have Robert Arsenic Hansen.
Hello.
Can't get him out of the house out of Austin, but that's
why would I want to leave here?
All right, let's jump into this AppSec stuff here. So the top story, and because we did our HackerKast a little bit late last week, so not a lot of stuff, but still some cool stuff. The first one we're going to cover is Uber. Order a taxi via mobile phone Uber that's worth like $17 billion. That company. They suffered a breach of their drivers. I think it was the drivers' names or license plate numbers, and I think it came through a third party. But this one was kind of interesting because the way the information was hacked, illegally accessed, I don't think they made a great distinction, is that for somehow, some way, Uber put their database keys in a public GitHub repository. So anybody that looked at the GitHub repository got access to the key, and somebody used the key to download their database of drivers and 50,000 or so drivers. So that's kind of what happened. What's a little bit more interesting about that is of the 50,000 people who looked at the GitHub repository, Uber is suing GitHub to get those IP addresses so they can do some kind of incident response. So, but Matt's been on top of this GitHub disclosure thing for a while, just as a general concept, well beyond Uber. So Matt, what's going on there?
Yeah, this is something that's been happening for a long time, and I think we even talked about it briefly on another HackerKast. But this is a really, really easy thing to do. It's like giant facepalm, and everyone's kind of saying, oh crap, Uber, way to go, right? But even people that really know about security and are really paranoid still can accidentally do this. The most common scenario that we see this in is if you're like coding on different branches and you're pushing certain branches up and not necessarily production, you're gonna want your private keys probably in your code in your development branches just for ease of coding purposes. You don't want to go that extra step while a developer is just trying to pump out a feature. So if one of those branches just ends up to sync to GitHub, then there goes that private API key also, right? So we see this a lot with Amazon AWS keys, and Amazon and GitHub both actually proactively scan GitHub repositories for these private keys and then notify the people who did this, hey, it looks like you accidentally did this, you should probably take it down, that sort of thing. So kudos to them for doing that. And as much as we want to laugh at Uber, this is like there are security guys who have published blogs saying, "Hey, my bad, I did this." so
that's pretty cool of GitHub to do that proactively for the user base. But it also says, how common must this, for them to do that? It must be incredibly common.
Yeah, I mean, it's still really popular, but like Google Dorks, like you can search Google for stuff that probably shouldn't be on the internet. A new fun thing to do is to do it on GitHub. Okay, let's search GitHub for strings that really shouldn't be in open source GitHub repositories, and a lot of them have to do with, okay, let's search for AWS key. Like AWS key equals, let's see how many GitHub repositories pop up. Silly things like that. So it's very prevalent.
So what's the best practice, even though I hate that word, what's the best practice for not shooting yourself in the foot via GitHub this way?
Proactive, like just realizing which branches you're using locally versus prod, maybe having private dev repos, that would really help. But usually kind of best practice is to use environmental variables for these API keys. Just store them locally in environmental variables on your dev machine, and you can just invoke that environmental variable in the code instead of actually putting the key in the code. That's what I do. That's like the best thing I can think of, the easiest way I can think of.
So you simply can't sync it in that way. It comes from somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a local config, and you just leave it in an environmental variable there that only the code on that machine can get, and then the key doesn't end up just everywhere. So.
So speaking of monitoring environments and monitoring for a hack or a mistake, one of the things that Robert Hansen put together and wrote a blog post about is how to monitor your DNS for hijacking, and he wrote a tool. So Robert can code. All right.
Barely. Yeah, I've been coding for a long time, so people don't like my code because it looks old. But no, basically all this does is it looks for your DNS that you say this host name points to this IP address, and if that ever changes, it sends you an email and says, hey, it changed. So I wrote it a long time ago, and for kind of a different purpose. It was more to help me monitor when my companies that I was sort of hosting or whatever, if they had any problems. But I just basically refactored the code and made it much more portable and usable for sort of everybody. But basically, if you notice that your site's about to go, or if it's a critical site and it's something that you really don't want to move, basically you put it in this little config and basically run it out of cron once an hour or whatever, and it'll tell you if anything changes. So it's a great way for, like, in that recent Sony thing, I forget what country it happened in, but where they got their DNS hijacked from the Lizard Squad. This would be a good example where you can see something like that happen.
So that's a pretty cool tool. So it seems to be like there just should be an online service that does this for you. Is there anything that runs like that, or should we just put it on a website somewhere?
Yeah, the closest thing I know of is doing like snapshots of the HTML of a page, but even that's pretty terrible because it's really easy to detect and create something that's very similar. Because the real problem, I mean, Lizard Squad didn't do this. What they could have done is made an exact mirror copy of the old page. So I think those tools are actually inferior because they would have just shown, yeah, this is exactly the same page. It just happens to be in a different IP address. So the answer is no, there's nothing like that.
Huh. So we were also talking a little bit about Hillary Clinton. She's in cybersecurity news again today, and for having her State Department job, during the State Department job, she wasn't using a State Department email address. She was using a personal email address, much to, well, a lot of privacy advocates and records-keeping advocates, as it rightly should be, are concerned about not having access to the email. And somehow this DNS hijacking relates to her somehow. So what were you looking at here, Robert?
Yeah, so I started probing around to see if I could find what this email address actually was, this old email address she was using instead of the State Department. And I found it. It's ClintonEmail.com, and she has this particular site called SSLVPN.ClintonEmail.com, which it was up when I looked at it, but it is now down after I posted about it on Twitter. So I'm guessing someone saw that and turned it off in a big hurry, or maybe it's getting just slammed with traffic right now. I don't know which.
So there's all kind of speculation about this on why she did this. Was she did this to hide something, or the other rumor, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that the DoD or the DoD or wherever they store administration emails was not secure. It's infiltrated by hackers. They couldn't get them out of the system. So maybe she just felt like her own private email system was the more secure way to go for State Department business.
Maybe. I mean, the nice part about it is it's actually trickier to FOIA from her perspective. So because it is her personal email account. So maybe there's possible indiscretions or something she's attempting to hide. I have no idea.
So let's move on to another story here. There's a lot of interesting stuff. So I think, Robert, this is another one for you. The TP top-level domain, which is for Eastern Timor, was dropped, and they switched it. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, they switched it from .tp to .tl. Which normally wouldn't be a big deal, but in this particular case, people were actually using it. It wasn't like no one was using it. So the problem here is if someone ever came back, because the top-level domains are now open for registration, all someone has to go back and do is re-register .tp, and now you have all of these links that are inbound to you pointing at .tp that are not, no one owns anymore. So you could basically re-register Google.tp, and you'd have all this inbound traffic from people who didn't know better. So that's pretty bad.
How often do TLDs switch like this?
I've never heard of it.
Very, very often.
I've never heard of it. I think this is the first time.
I guess this is like, when sometimes domain names expire and people jump on for the domain name and they get all kinds of like indirect traffic. So this is just one layer above. Not only when a TLD moves, you get all the second level domains.
I think, maybe there was .tp could sound an awful lot like toilet paper. Maybe there's some people realized, oh, this wasn't such a great top level domain. But .tl is much, much, much better. So. I don't know. Higher value to them. So anyway, for whatever reason, they decided to change, and now that leaves a big opening for people who go back and re-register that old TLD.
So let's talk some conferences real quick, because there's a couple of big conferences coming up through the year. That's some of my personal favorites. So we got AppSec USA coming up. Well, that's in September. We have WhiteHat USA in August, and then we also have RSA. That's actually the soonest one in April. And so we'll cover those real quick. But so RSA, so Matt and I, we got a couple of presentations coming up. So why don't you talk about yours, what you're going to cover?
Yeah, I'm giving the good old top 10 web hacks of the year talk, which is kind of my soul-sucking project right now. As you know, Jer,
yes.
Going through piles and piles of research from other people who are much better at that kind of stuff than I am, because they're the experts who made this stuff. And I'm not a crypto guy. Crypto's hard, man. But yeah, going through that right now. It's in expert panel voting land. So we've got our top 15, and we're just ordering the top 10 now. So that got accepted to RSA. That'll be in April. But yeah, the CFP for AppSec USA is open, so we got to submit some stuff there too.
Yeah, I'll definitely submit some stuff to that. It's gonna be a really good event. It's gonna be in San Francisco, so it's gonna be close to home. So yeah, and then we got WhiteHat, so the CFP's open, so there's gonna be a ton of cool AppSec stuff coming around. We'll see if we submit anything. Probably not. We'll keep our research to ourselves right now. So, but it should be an awesome one in Vegas.
Always is.
So let's talk about one more piece of our really interesting research, something called relative path overwrite. So Robert, you were looking at this one, right?
Yeah, this is actually extremely cool research. Basically, if you have something like a style sheet on your page and you just reference it as style.css instead of /style.css or the full path like http:// blah blah blah, what happens is if you're using certain types of programming languages, you're allowed to put like a slash at the very end of the HTML or of the URL path. So let's say it's like blah blah blah.php. You can put blah blah blah.php/ and it'll still show up. So what happens is the page then thinks that that's the relative path. So your browser goes, well, look here in this directory, and what'll end up happening is it just appends style.css at the end of that. And since that's not there, it just the web server assumes you meant that PHP file, and it will display the PHP file as a style sheet. So that wouldn't be a big problem, except there's problems in CSS itself where you can embed CSS in a page, and it'll ignore everything above and below it and actually render that style. So he's able to inject style sheets into a page with no angle brackets. He's not injecting inside of a style sheet. It's just some random hey, what's your name? My name is Curly Brace, blah, 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 and puts a style sheet in. And it works, and he's able to, at least in Internet Explorer, is able to get cross-site scripting using this. So the moral of the story is you either have to use full path, like http:// in your URL, or you have to do something like put a slash in front of it. And I've always told people you should do that. You should actually put a slash for all kinds of reasons. There's actually annoying things that happen when you copy files around that break stuff when you do that, if you don't do that, rather. But now I think that's the only way for it. I think you absolutely have to do it. Even .. that kind of trying to make it relative path, even that gets broken by this method.
Okay, so if that's oh man, this is gonna be so bad. If that's the way you have to fix it, imagine how many how many things are gonna have to be fixed out there. We're talking billions of pages.
Yes, billions. That's actually why I've always told people put a slash. It's more portable, doesn't have this problem, but now, I mean, even though he says it's safe, he said it's probably safe. So I agree. Now that I know how this technique works, I agree it's probably safe too. So now I would say if I'm really going to be anal about this, I would make sure to have the full file path just to be absolutely certain.
Okay, so now are all the DAS scanners in the world, are we going to have to start alerting on the lack of slash in a style sheet?
At least for Internet Explorer, yeah. I mean, Chrome, Firefox, they all do sort of the right thing and ignore that kind of stuff. But Internet Explorer allows it to happen, so there's still a huge chunk of the market share, 40% or something. So
this stuff has been dangerous for a while, not for the same reasons as this research. This research is really, really cool, but the relative paths have been pretty dangerous for like content spoofing type things in Flash files. I used to find that kind of stuff all the time, where if you use the ... slash, or not even ... but just like slash some path, if you could get some, there was an old Flash bug that you can spoof the host header, and that's where it was pulling everything from. So if you could spoof the host header in a request in a Flash file, and then you can add this relative path to the end, it would actually go to a different page. So, I mean, this has just been a bad coding practice for a long time anyway, but this is really cool research.
So the problem in terms of breakage, if you do put the http:// blah, blah, blah stuff in there, it actually will cause other things to break, because a lot of times it's host dependent. So if you have like an HTML page instead of like a PHP page, instead of it knowing what host it's on, it's just going to assume, you pull it in from whatever you typed in. If I typed in host.com and suddenly I switched over to some other host, I moved my domain or whatever, I got to go back and change all of that stuff, all of the site. It's big. I mean, this is not one of those things you're going to fix in 10 minutes. This is a big fix.
And who's the researcher? Was it Gareth?
Yeah.
Was it Gareth Hayes?
Yes.
Kudos, Gareth. He always comes out with cool stuff. So
yeah, this is a bit old. This research actually was early last year, but I think it's just now getting some press.
Cool.
Yeah. So I guess it's hey Matt, was this on the list for the top 10 web hacking techniques? What, like on the big list or the top 15?
I don't think it made the big list. I don't think anyone submitted it. No.
I don't think anybody realized. This is like one of the ones where it's like everybody wasn't looking at this one. It didn't get a lot of credit. No one really understood it. So maybe everybody overlooked this one.
I think so.
I might throw it to the experts and say, hey.
Late submission.
late consideration.
This is one of those things where web security just gets so complicated, the knowledge base is so vast that even the experts would miss this one.
Yeah. This is the first I'm hearing about it. So.
Huh. Well, cool. So that's HackerKast for the week. Lots of cool stuff out there. So a few more best practices and things to be mindful of. Robert, Matt, thanks. And I'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
Bye, guys.